The piece was called First Light. Lacey Whitmore held it up to the window of the restaurant on Hazelton Avenue, laughing, the way young women laugh when they want everyone to hear them, telling her friends it was a gift from someone whose wife clearly stopped appreciating nice things. The ceramic bowl caught the afternoon light and threw it back in a dozen directions, the way Aldwyn Hartwell had designed it to do 50 years ago in a studio in Cape Breton. It was valued at $380,000. It was the piece that had started a dynasty, and Imogen Hartwell was sitting 6 feet away. She heard every word. She set down her espresso cup very carefully. She did not turn around. She picked up her phone and looked at the screen without seeing it. Then she put the phone face down on the table and looked out the window at the October street below, where the maples had gone full amber and the city was doing what Toronto always does in autumn, pretending nothing is wrong while the light quietly dies. Before we go any further, if you're watching this right now, drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed to Ivory Secrets yet, hit that button and stay with me until the very end. Because what Imogen does next is something none of us are going to forget. Imogen Hartwell was 48 years old. She had been the executive director of the Hartwell Foundation for 11 years, had guided it through 3 federal funding reviews, had personally curated 4 retrospectives of her late father's work, and had sat across from every kind of difficult person a position like hers produces. Collectors who wanted favors, donors who wanted influence, critics who wanted access. She had sat across from all of them and come away with exactly what the foundation needed and nothing she hadn't intended to give. She was her father's daughter. Aldwyn Hartwell had built his reputation on patience and precision. The belief that anything worth doing required the willingness to wait, to look carefully, to act only when the moment was exact. He had spent 9 years developing the glaze technique that made First Light possible. 9 years of failure and starting over before that bowl came out of the kiln, and he understood, finally, that he had made the thing he'd been trying to make all along. Imogen had grown up watching him work. She understood patience the way some people understand music. Not as a discipline, but as a native language. She stood up from her table in the restaurant on Hazelton Avenue. She paid her bill. She put on her coat. She walked past the table where Lacey Whitmore was still laughing, still, holding the bowl as though it were a trophy she had won fairly, and Imogen did not look at it, or at her. She walked through the door and out into the October air, and took exactly 3 breaths before she pulled out her phone and called her solicitor. "Colin," she said when he answered, "I need you to pull every document connected to the Foundation subsidiary accounts. Everything with Sebastian's name on it. I need it today." A pause. Colin Atterbury had been the Foundation's counsel for 14 years. He had known Imogen since she was 34 and had watched her operate under pressure enough times to know what this particular tone of voice meant. "How serious?" he said. "Serious enough that I'm calling you from the sidewalk," she said. "I'll start immediately," he said. "Give me 4 hours." She hung up. She stood on Hazelton Avenue with the maple trees going amber around her and the sound of the city moving in every direction, and she made a second call. Then she went home. The home was a Victorian semi-detached in the annex. Imogen's, not theirs. Though Sebastian Crane had lived in it for 19 years, she had inherited it from Aldwyn along with the foundation, the archive, and the ceramic collection that occupied the temperature-controlled room off the ground floor studio. That room had a keypad entry. The code was Aldwyn's birth year reversed. Sebastian had never asked for it, and she had never offered it. And for a long time she had told herself that was simply the natural division of a marriage between 2 people with separate professional lives. She went to the studio now. She went straight to the shelf where First Light had sat for 11 years. Since the last retrospective, since the insurance assessment, since the morning she had moved it from the Foundation vault to her own home because she wanted it near her. The shelf held a reproduction. She had one of those. She had commissioned it herself 10 years ago for a traveling exhibition. The reproduction was flawless, The weight was almost exactly right. Almost. She stood there for a moment with the reproduction in her hands. Then she put it back. Then she sat down on the studio floor, which she had not done in years, and she looked at the ceramic light fixture above her that Edwin had made in 1974, and she breathed. She did not cry. She had decided 3 hours ago, in the restaurant on Hazelton Avenue, that she would not cry until this was over. The decision had not been difficult. She had survived harder things. She would survive this one with more resources and more clarity than she'd had at 32. When Edwin died, and she had taken over a foundation that was 6 months from insolvency and turned it into what it now was. She stood up, she went to her desk, she began a list. Sebastian came home at 7, which was an hour earlier than usual, which told her something. He was 54, broad-shouldered, with the easy confidence of a man who had spent 3 decades having his aesthetic opinions treated as fact. He had built a respectable practice in residential architecture before he married Imogen. But it was the foundation's backing, the Hartwell name, attached to the crane-designed Meridian Art Center on King Street, that had made him the kind of architect people flew in from Vancouver to commission. He knew that. She had never used it against him, which she now understood he had taken as proof that she never would. He came into the kitchen, where she was standing with a glass of water, reading nothing. "You're home," he said. "I am," she said. He opened the refrigerator. He stood there looking into it. "Good day?" "Productive," she said. He took out a container of leftovers. "I ran into Farida at the Meridian today. She was asking about the Aldwyn Prize Ceremony, whether we'd both be attending." "Of course," Imogen said. "We always attend." "Right." He put the container in the microwave. He didn't look at her. The microwave hummed. She also mentioned she'd been at a lunch in Yorkville. Said she'd seen a very interesting ceramic piece. The pause that followed was exactly 4 seconds. Imogen counted them. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. She looked at him then. She looked at him the way she looked at grant applications that had something to hide. Fully. Without hurry. "I think you do," she said. And then she picked up her glass of water and went to the living room. He didn't follow her. She sat with the lights low, and the city outside the windows, and the full weight of 19 years arranged around her in the furniture and the art, and the particular silence of a house that has decided something, without being asked. At 9 o'clock she called Ruth. Ruth Pemberton was 71 years old, a former Ontario cabinet minister, and possibly the most well-networked woman in the city of Toronto. She had been Imogen's mother's closest friend, had known Imogen since she was 7, and was one of perhaps 3 people on Earth in whose judgment Imogen placed full confidence. "I know," Ruth said, before Imogen had finished her second sentence. "Farida called me this afternoon. Apparently the girl held it up to the window, first light, in the middle of a restaurant in Yorkville. A breath. I assume you've already called Colin." 4 hours ago. "And?" "Colin came by at 6. I need to tell you what he found." Imogen told her. The documents Colin had pulled that afternoon showed a pattern, over 3 years. Sebastian had redirected just over $900,000 from a Hartwell Foundation discretionary account into a numbered company registered in Ontario under a name that wasn't his, but which Colin had already traced to him through one layer of corporate structure. He had done it incrementally. 12,000 here, 40 here, never enough to trigger the annual audit thresholds. He was building an exit fund, Colin had said, and Imogen had heard the same thing in those words that she was hearing now in Ruth's silence. "The Aldwyn Prize Ceremony is in 5 days, Imogen said. Ruth did not hesitate. "You want to do it there?" "It's the right room, the right people. The foundation's name is on the wall of that building." A long exhale. "It is." Then, with the focus of a woman who has always known the difference between grieving and acting, "You'll need something to wear. I called Priscilla Lamb this afternoon. She's coming Thursday." Ruth made a sound that was half admiration, half something older than admiration. "You called a designer before you called me," she said. I called Colin first. Of course you did. A beat. All right, I'm in. The seating chart. I'm on the committee. I can manage the seating chart. I need her near the center of the room. Good light. Clear sightlines from the main lectern. Easily done, and Sebastian? Give him confirmation for his usual table. Just not the right one. Another pause. What else? I need Dana Greer from the Globe in the room when I arrive, near the east entrance. Standing, not seated. Dana owes me a favor from 3 years ago. I'll call her tomorrow. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Imogen, is there more to this than the peace and the money? Imogen looked out the window at the October street below. He was planning to leave, she said, on his terms, with enough hidden away that the divorce would go badly for the foundation. Not for me personally, for the foundation. He was going to use it as leverage. Ruth was very quiet. When she spoke, her voice had shifted quality entirely. That, she said softly, is a different category of betrayal. Yes, Imogen said, it is. Then, we're not just protecting your reputation at the ceremony. No, we're ending this carefully, in front of the people who need to see it. A pause. Then, with the settled satisfaction of a woman who has spent 50 years understanding that timing is everything, I'll call the seating committee first thing in the morning. Priscilla Lamb arrived Thursday at 10 with 2 assistants and 3 garment bags, and the focused energy of someone who had been briefed and understood precisely what was being asked of her. She was 46, Torontonian, by birth and trained in Milan, and she had dressed Imogen for a decade. She knew her client's posture, her preferred weight of fabric, the way she occupied a room. Tell me what you want her to understand when she sees you, Priscilla said, spreading swatches across the kitchen table, as though laying out a map. Imogen sat across from her. That she is irrelevant, she said, and that he miscalculated everything. Priscilla picked up a length of charcoal silk, not black, not quite. The color of graphite, of something that absorbs light rather than reflecting it. She held it against Imogen's collarbone and tilted her head. This, she said. Yes. And the neckline, structural, architectural, nothing soft. Yes. And something at the throat, not jewelry, something that reads as armor. Imogen thought for a moment. I have a piece, she said, one of my father's early experiments, a ceramic collar. He made it as a study for a larger work. It's never been worn. It's not conventionally beautiful. Priscilla looked at her. Show me. Imogen brought it out. It was irregular, asymmetric, glazed in the same gray-green as the first light bowl. Edwin's signature palette. Against the graphite silk, the 2 colors locked together in a way that stopped Priscilla mid-sentence. This is perfect, Priscilla said quietly. This is the whole story. Imogen looked at herself in the hallway mirror. Something in her chest settled. Not relief, something older and cleaner than that. The particular steadiness of a person who has remembered what they are made of. Make it, she said. Colin came back Friday with the full picture. He sat at her kitchen table, with folders spread between them, and the composure of a solicitor delivering news he wishes were different. Over 36 months, Sebastian had redirected $940,000. The numbered company had no stated business purpose. There was also a secondary issue. Sebastian had listed 3 foundation-owned properties grant applications to the Ontario Arts Council without board disclosure, which amounted to misrepresentation of institutional assets. He was reducing the foundation's visible footprint, Colin said, making it look smaller on paper, so that in any dissolution scenario, the valuation would be lower. Imogen looked at the folders for a long time. Can we freeze the numbered company? The foundation board has grounds to apply for an injunction. Monday morning I've already drafted the motion. He paused. Monday after the ceremony. She nodded. The sequence matters. It does. She was quiet. Not calculating, or not only that, something else moved through her, something that wasn't strategy, something that knew what it cost to sit at a kitchen table in your own home with evidence of $900,000 of theft and a stolen ceramic piece and not come apart entirely. I loved him, she said. It came out simply, the way true things do when you've stopped managing them. I want to be clear that I'm not confused about that. Colin said nothing. He waited. But, she said, the way you love someone doesn't obligate you to absorb what they take from you. And I intend to take everything back. She paused. Every single thing. He gathered his papers. At the door he stopped. Your father would have been proud of you, he said. I'm certain of that. She didn't respond, but after he left, she sat alone in the kitchen for a few minutes with her hands folded on the table, and she let herself feel exactly as much as she permitted herself to feel, which was considerable and which was enough. Then she went back to work. She had not planned the phone call. At 4:30 on the afternoon of the ceremony, her cell rang with an unfamiliar number. She almost let it go to voicemail. Something made her answer. Is this Imogen Hartwell? The voice was young and unsteady in the way of someone who has rehearsed a thing and is now finding the rehearsal insufficient. This is she. A pause. My name is Lacey Whitmore. Another pause longer. I know this is strange. I need to ask you something. Imogen went very still. Ask it. The piece, the ceramic bowl, a breath, he told me. It was in storage, that it wasn't being used, he said. He said you had given permission, a stop. That's not true, is it? Not quite a question. Imogen said nothing. Mrs. Hartwell, the voice dropped. I'm not. I didn't know. I think I didn't let myself know. But I need you to tell me what this piece actually is. It is my father's most significant early work, Imogen said. He made it in 1974. It has been in my family's care since his death. It is not something Sebastian had any right to give to anyone. A long exhale on the other end. I thought so. A very small pause. I'm sorry, I mean that. I believe you, Imogen said, and she did, which was its own complicated territory. What are you going to do? Lacey asked. I'm going to attend the ceremony tonight, Imogen said, and I'm going to reclaim what belongs to the foundation. All of it. A pause. What you do with that information is your decision. Silence, then. He's not what I thought he was, is he? Imogen considered this. Sebastian is very good at being what people need him to be, she said, until he decides he doesn't need to be it anymore. Something on the other end that might have been a painful, involuntary laugh. Bring the piece tonight, Imogen said. Bring it, and when the moment comes, let me manage what happens. A very long silence. Why are you telling me this? Because what he did to me, he did to both of us, with different tools at different scales. But he did it to both of us. Another silence, then quietly, all right. She hung up. She sat for a moment with the phone in her hands. She had not planned Lacey. She had not planned the call. But she had learned in 48 years, and 3 corporate restructurings, and 1 marriage, and 100 moments that required her to adapt without showing the adaptation, that sometimes the plan changes, and the only question is whether you change with it or get left behind. She had changed with it. She had turned an unexpected variable into something she could use. Not cruelty, not mercy, exactly, something more practical and more honest than either. At 7:40, the car arrived at the Meridian Arts Center on King Street West. The Meridian was, among other things, the building whose facade bore the Crane name in the architectural record. Sebastian's name, attached to a building whose most significant donor had been the Hartwell Foundation. Imogen sat in the car for 3 seconds after it stopped. 3 seconds of complete stillness. The weight of the ceramic collar at her throat, the graphite silk arranged around her feet, the sound of the city muffled behind the tinted glass. 3 seconds of being entirely alone with everything she knew, and everything she was going to do with it. Then she opened the door herself. She had asked the driver not to come around. The November air was cold and specific and honest. She heard cameras before she heard her name. She had timed her arrival deliberately, not at the peak of the entrance rush, but 20 minutes after, when the steps were thin and the photographers were restless. She moved at the pace Priscilla had prescribed when they'd practiced Thursday evening. Not the pace of someone hurrying toward anything, the pace of someone who knows everything is already moving toward her. Dana Greer was near the east entrance. exactly as Ruth had arranged. She was 50, had covered the arts and culture beat for the Globe for 22 years, and had the kind of attention that distinguishes between spectacle and significance. She looked at Imogen, and her expression did the small, quick thing that good journalists' faces do when a story clarifies. They made eye contact for half a second. Imogen gave the smallest possible nod. Dana lifted her phone almost imperceptibly. Inside, the ceremony was approaching its second hour. Imogen moved through it without announcing herself, saying hellos to the right people, asking about the right things. Farida Osai's new commission in Calgary, the Aldwyn jury chair's grandchildren, the catering director whose name she had remembered for 6 years, because she believed that remembering was the most basic form of respect. Ruth found her within a minute, moving through the crowd with the unhurried authority of a woman who has attended this event since before most of its guests were born. "They're here," Ruth said quietly, arriving at Imogen's side without breaking stride. "He came in 20 minutes ago. There was a situation about the table." "How did he handle it?" "Poorly," Ruth said, with a satisfaction she didn't bother to conceal. He spoke to the event's coordinator, in a voice that was trying very hard to be calm. She was gracious and immovable. "He's at table 16? Near the service corridor." "Yes, and she's at table 12. Directly beneath the south lighting rig. You cannot look at the lectern and not also see table 12. "And first light?" "She brought it," Ruth said. "It's on the table in front of her like a centerpiece, against the white linen, against that light. You'll see it the moment you look her way. Everyone will." Imogen did not look yet. She continued through the room. She found her own table, table 1, where the foundation chair sat, where she had sat for 12 of the last 15 Aldwyn ceremonies, and she ate and talked and listened and was, to every external measurement, a woman enjoying a Saturday evening. She tracked with quiet peripheral precision exactly where every relevant person was in the room and exactly how things were developing. Sebastian, at table 16, ate without appearing to taste anything and spoke to the people around him without appearing to hear their responses. He was a man sitting in the middle of an event he could no longer read, surrounded by variables he could no longer control, and the experience was costing him composure, which for Sebastian had always been everything: the armor he wore, the thing that made him convincing in every room he entered. Without it, he was simply a man who had stolen from his wife and was beginning to understand that she knew. At the moment she chose, she stood up. She did not make an announcement. She simply rose from her chair and moved toward the lectern at the center of the room, where the ceremony chair, a man named Aldous Bright, who had known Aldwyn Hartwell personally, was preparing to close the evening's formal proceedings. He saw her coming. He took in the graphite silk, the ceramic collar, the expression on her face, and recalibrated in the span of about 4 seconds. He had known the Hartwell Foundation for 30 years. "The floor is yours," he said quietly, after the final award. The final award went to a young sculptor from Winnipeg who cried briefly and thankfully and thanked her grandmother. The room applauded. Then Aldous returned to the lectern and said, with a formality that surprised even Imogen, "I'd like to invite Imogen Hartwell, to say a few words." Both names, Hartwell first. She stepped to the microphone. The room's attention reorganized itself completely, the way attention does when something shifts from expected to significant. Not loudly. Simply with a quality of stillness. She looked out at the faces. She found Ruth, who was already standing. She found Dana Greer, near the east wall with her phone steady. She found Farida Osai, whose expression held the particular solidarity of someone who has chosen her side and is at peace with it. She found Sebastian, at table 16, near the corridor, in the specific stillness of a man who has just understood that the ground he is standing on is not the ground he thought it was. And she found Lacey Whitmore at table 12, beneath the south lighting rig, with first light on the table in front of her, its glaze catching the light in exactly the way Aldwyn had designed it to do half a century ago. Lacey was looking at Imogen with the expression of someone who made a phone call 6 hours ago and is now understanding in full what that call set in motion. Imogen placed her hands on the edges of the lectern, not gripping, resting. The Hartwell Foundation has been part of this ceremony for 16 years, she said. Her voice was even and warm and fully projected without effort. My father attended the first Aldwyn Prize he was eligible for in 1981 and came home and told me that the point of an event like this was not the awards. It was the accountability, the sense that the people in this room could see each other clearly and be seen in return. The room was absolutely quiet. I have been thinking a great deal about accountability this week, she said. About what it means to look clearly at the truth of a situation and choose to address it, rather than look away, because looking away is easier. She paused. Many of you know First Light. Not at table 12. Not yet. Her eyes moved across the room at large. It is the piece my father made in 1974 that established his signature glaze technique. It is the piece that made the Hartwell name synonymous with the kind of sustained artistic practice this foundation exists to support. It has been in my family's care for 49 years. A pause that filled the room completely. 3 weeks ago, it left our possession, without my knowledge or consent. She let the silence do what silence does when placed precisely where it belongs. I'm telling you this, she said, not because I want your sympathy. I have never found sympathy particularly useful. I'm telling you because the people in this room, this community, this annual gathering of everyone who has built their work alongside ours, deserve to know the truth about what the Hartwell name means and what it does not mean, about what I have built and what I intend to protect. A pause. And about the fact that I am still here, still standing in this room that my family helped build, not diminished, not confused, not going anywhere. She stepped back from the microphone. The applause began with Ruth. Imogen saw her stand and then moved outward through the room, the way a true thing moves when it finds its audience. Not loudly at first, and then not quietly at all. She did not look at Sebastian. She didn't need to. She walked back toward her table, and she felt him from across the room the way you feel a change in air pressure. The specific chill of a man understanding that the story he thought he was telling has been taken entirely from his hands by someone who has been holding a better one all along. She had barely sat down when she heard the chair at table 12 scrape back. She looked up. Lacey Whitmore was walking toward her. She was 26 years old, and she was carrying First Light in both hands, the way you carry something that belongs to someone else and always has, and she was moving through the room with the particular focus of a person executing a difficult decision before she can think herself out of it. Sebastian saw her when she was 10 feet away. His face went through several things at once, things that had no clean names, only directions. Lacey, he said, a warning. She didn't look at him, she looked at Imogen. She stopped 2 feet away. The lighting from the south rig reached her here. It reached the bowl in her hands, and the glaze caught it and held it, in the particular way Edwin had always said good work holds the light, without hoarding it, just long enough to show you what's there. Mrs. Hartwell, she said. Lacey, Imogen said. Lacey extended the bowl. Her hands were steady, which Imogen suspected cost her something real. This belongs to you, she said. It always did. I just didn't ask the right questions soon enough. The room had gone entirely, openly still. Not the stillness of people, pretending not to listen. The stillness of people who have stopped pretending. Sebastian said, Lacey, don't. You told me she knew, Lacey said. She turned to look at him, just once, briefly, with the composure of someone being fair one final time. You told me it had been agreed. You told me a lot of things. She turned back to Imogen. I'm not doing this for you. I want to be honest about that. I'm doing it because I don't want to be someone who keeps something that isn't hers because it was easier not to ask questions. A pause, and her voice went slightly unsteady at its edges. And because I think you were right on the phone today. About what he did to both of us. Imogen looked at the bowl in Lacey's hands. She reached out and took it. The weight of it was exactly as she remembered. Heavier than it looked, the way her father had always said real work should be. heavier than you expect when you first pick it up. More than it appears to contain. Thank you, she said quietly. Lacey nodded once and walked back across the room without looking at Sebastian again. Imogen watched her go, the straight back, the deliberate pace, the walk of someone who has done a difficult thing and is carrying it correctly, and felt, unexpectedly, something close to genuine respect. Then she looked at Sebastian. He was looking at where Lacey had been. His face was the face of a man watching several structures collapse at once. The affair, the exit fund, the narrative he had been quietly assembling with colleagues over the past week, the composure he had worn into this building, like a second suit, all of it going simultaneously in the room where his name was on the architectural record, in front of every person whose opinion he had ever carefully cultivated. Sebastian, Imogen said. He looked at her. I think you should go home tonight, she said, pleasantly, at the conversational volume of someone having a normal exchange. And I think you should have your solicitor call Colin on Monday morning. And I think, if you are as intelligent as you have always believed yourself to be, you'll understand that what comes next depends entirely on how cooperative you choose to be. He looked at her for a long moment. She watched him taking inventory of the room, the faces, the postures, the quality of attention trained entirely in their direction. Watched him understand that there was nothing left to manage here. The story had already been told. It had been told by a woman in graphite silk, with a ceramic collar at her throat and her father's most important piece in her hand, and it had been told clearly and without performance and in front of everyone who needed to hear it. He stood, he straightened his jacket, he left without saying anything else. Ruth's hand found Imogen's under the table, a brief, firm pressure, not sympathy, confirmation. The room exhaled, not literally, but the quality of the air changed, the held breath, tension released, conversations resumed, the particular relief of a gathering that has witnessed something significant and is now minute to process it. Sunday morning arrived quietly, the way mornings do after something large has finally happened. Imogen slept 5 hours. Real sleep, the kind that comes after something has resolved at a level deep enough to allow the body to actually rest. She woke at 6 and lay still for a moment in the dark, aware before she was fully conscious that something in her had shifted. Some fundamental recalibration, some quiet settling of a weight that had been held at an angle for too long. She got up, she made coffee, she sat at her desk. Dana Greer's piece had gone up at midnight on the Globe Online. The headline was clean and precise. Hartwell Foundation files for injunction following financial review. Architect Sebastian Crane cited. The third paragraph mentioned the Aldwyn ceremony. The sixth quoted an unnamed source, close to the foundation, who said that Imogen Hartwell had been aware of the discrepancies for 2 weeks and had moved immediately and appropriately to protect the institution's assets. She read it through once, then she set the phone face down and drank her coffee. At 10:30 Sebastian called. She let it ring twice, then she answered. I've seen the Globe, he said. His voice was different from the night before, stripped of everything that wasn't simply exhausted and true. I want you to know that I knew it was wrong, what I was doing. I told myself the stories people tell themselves, but I knew. Imogen was quiet. I need you to know that, he said. I don't entirely understand why, but I do. She thought about 19 years. About the man she had married, and the man he had slowly become, when the money and the recognition and the accumulated permission of a successful life had told him, consistently and quietly, that the rules which applied to other people didn't quite apply to him. Colin will expect your solicitor's call at 9 on Monday, she said. Cooperation will be noted. I'm not interested in punishing you beyond what's legally and financially necessary, but I am going to take back everything that belongs to the foundation. All of it. A long pause, then all right. She hung up. She went to the studio. She put First Light back in its place on the open shelf. Not the vault, but the shelf, where she could see it from her desk every day, the way Edwin had always meant for it to be seen. She stood there, looking at it for a moment. The November light came in through the east window, and Miss Glaze caught it and held it, gave it back in the particular way. Her father had spent 9 years learning to make it do. Her phone buzzed, an unfamiliar number. "You were right about him. I hope you know I genuinely didn't understand what I was carrying. Thank you for letting me do the right thing. L." Imogen looked at the message for a moment. She thought about a 26-year-old woman walking across a room with a bowl that didn't belong to her, carrying it correctly, giving it back in front of everyone who needed to see it, not because she had to, not because it served her, but because she had decided she didn't want to be someone who kept something that wasn't hers. She thought about the particular difficulty of doing a right thing in public, when there is nothing left to gain from it except being the person who did it. She put the phone down. She looked at first light on the shelf, at the light it held and gave back, at the proof it contained of 9 years of patience and failure and starting over. She thought about what she was going to build next. The Foundation's new programming, independence, fully restored. The difficult work her father had always meant it to support. She had a meeting Tuesday with the programming director. She had notes. She had the trust, the archive, the Hartwell name at its full and unambiguous authority, and the particular, indestructible knowledge that she had faced the worst version of a betrayal a marriage can produce, and had faced it clearly and responded to it with precision. And, at the critical moments, with something that was not just strategy, but actual grace. She was not at the end of anything. She was, as she had always been, exactly at the beginning.